The Creep in the Laundromat. This is posted by Tari T. So this is my first post to this subreddit, but I figured I'd share anyway. My ex and I used to live in an old apartment complex. It wasn't outfitted with a washer or dryer, so we had to go to the laundromat next door. It was late at night, but I needed my work clothes to be clean for the next day, and we had the money then. I was sitting by the window watching cartoon clips on YouTube, while my clothes were in the dryer. My ex was outside bathing when this guy came in who I didn't recognize. He looked dirty, like he might have been homeless. I didn't ever get a look at his face. He came to sit by me and asked what I was watching. I thought he was just trying to make conversation, so I told him about the show. He didn't seem to be listening though. He got a bit too close for comfort, trying to peer over my shoulder to watch the clip with me, and I tried to scoot away a bit without being too obvious. Looking back on it, he might have been using it as an excuse to stare down my shirt. That's when my ex walked in. He immediately gets the message when he sees how close this guy is, and decides to stay close to me until he leaves. Once the guy sees that I'm no longer alone, he leaves in a hurry across the street to hide in a gas station. A lady walks in as we're calling the cops to report his suspicious behavior, and she asks what's going on. We tell her about the guy and her face morphs into one of fear. She tells us that the guy we saw has a history of harassing women and following them with the intention of getting them to have sex with him. He's had a violent streak, with a long history with the police. Keep in mind, my ex and I are both small. I'm a 5'3" string bean who can barely fight off a feral kitten, and my ex is about the same height, with just a little more muscle than me. The cops show up, and we tell them everything. Since he hadn't done anything against the law, they couldn't do anything other than talk to him and let him know that he was making people uncomfortable. But even then, we saw him pass by across the street a few times. We didn't want to leave the laundromat and risk being followed, so we stayed there an hour after our clothes had dried to make sure he'd finally left. The lady we met gave me her box cutter keychain, said to keep it with me, just in case he showed up again. We never saw him again after that, but I still wonder what might have happened if I had been alone that night. To be honest, I'm not sure. Nothing good though. Not the scariest thing in the world, but I figured I'd share it either way. Him. This is posted by Still Can't Draw. I am a 13-year-old girl that lives in a small home with a long driveway, but I keep seeing what looks like a man outside of my window. Most nights I can't see any features of what he looks like, except for what looks like wide eyes with no iris. He looks about 6 foot something from what I can tell, with where I can see his eye level at. I call him, but my sister and parents don't believe he is real. But one day, me and my sister were watching a movie in our living room when suddenly our porch light came on. We have a motion detection light since our other light busted, and we saw a face looking at us with a huge smile on its face. It looked to be a white man with wide eyes just like him. We ran to my room as fast as we could, bringing my dogs and electronics, and then we turned off the lights in my room and wait for a little while until he went back for our chargers and our electronics. She believed me after that. I do still see him most nights, and now sometimes he bangs on my window, or on things near my window, or near the outside of my room. Followed by a black van, posted by Jiren. 15 years ago, I attended a college in a historical downtown area in Savannah, Georgia. One late afternoon, I was walking back to the dorm. It was my birthday, so I was really excited to get back to my room and meet up with friends later. I was walking and thinking about my plans for the night. Then I heard some cat calling from behind. A group of men in a large beat-up black van drove by me, slowed down and hung their heads out the windows to leer and yell at me once they got my attention. I was more pissed off than scared, mostly since it was broad daylight with lots of other cars and people present. I just tried not to avert my eyes from them and glared back to let them know I wasn't frightened. They laughed and sped up, turned a quick right in the cross street in front of me, and drove off. A minute or two goes by, and the van comes back from the same side of the street and slowed down beside me. That took me off guard. What the hell are they going to do? It was 3 p.m., cars and people, and even a few police cars present as well. I tried to ignore them, but I was getting more flustered and anxious. One of the guys leaned head out and spat on the ground next to me, and then drove off again, turning down the street in front of me again. I realized they were just circling around the square so they could turn around and drive next to me again. I was getting really close to my dorm, and I started speeding up the pace. Once more, they drove next to me again, but instead of slowing down, they kept going. And then they stopped a couple 100 feet and parked on the side. Now I got worried. I kept telling myself they weren't going to do anything with people and police cars around. I figured it wasn't worth it, whatever it was they were trying to do, and I ducked down another street near a convention center. When I did, the van abruptly left and drove off again. I went through the convention, waited a couple of minutes, exited, and turned down the sidewalk that led to the main street. I didn't see them, so I figured I'd walk across a small walkway with stairs going down to a lower path that led dorm the other side, so home stretch. As I crossed the street, I saw the van with all the doors open and no one inside. I tried not to stop, afraid the guys might be hiding behind it, and just made for the walkway. One of the guys popped out and said, "Hey, I gotta talk to you. How was your trip from Mississippi? We tried calling you, but you wouldn't answer." I was in panic mode and just booked it past him, and luckily saw a group of other college students coming up the walkway. I waved them down like we were all friends. The dude immediately went back into the van and drove off. The students asked if I was okay and what that guy was up to, and if he was selling drugs or something. Coming to realization that yeah, maybe that was it. Just a really shady and aggressive out in broad daylight drug deal with a 20-something college student. I said the guy followed me here and that there were others with him. But when he drove off, it appeared empty. So where were the other guys? Back in my dorm room, I calmed down and waited for my roommate to come back from class. She was a bit freaked out by the whole thing and asked if I still wanted to go out for my birthday, which I did, since I would be around people and my friends. We all went to a local bar pizzeria, and I told the story, which got the attention of a friend's boyfriend who works part-time as a security guard for a hotel nearby. He said he'd heard about a group of guys trying to pull a girl into a van who managed to get away, and no one got the license plate to report it to the police. I started taking the college bus after that. I never saw the van or those guys ever again. I'm nearly 40 now, and I still think about them and what could have happened and how possible abductions can happen in public areas, in broad daylight, and so close to home. My brother is an absolute idiot, posted by Look at the Force. I really never thought I would even tell this story, but it is just one of those stories that still makes me think to this day, even though it didn't happen to me exactly. This story happened to my brother, actually. For context, the story was told to me by my little brother a few years after this event took place. Actually, he has only told me this story. Also, my brother is very intelligent, but with it, he is also pretty dumb. My brother was hanging out with his friends having a sleepover. Now, sometime my brother and his friend would go out into the woods to explore. A few hours ago, it had been raining. This is important. So while my brother and his friend were exploring the woods, they ended up coming across footsteps in the mud that appeared to come from a man due to the size of the footsteps. They decided to check it out and continue following the trail. A few minutes had passed and they were still following the footsteps. However, at this point, they were starting to get tired. So they decided to give up on following the footsteps and return back to the house to sleep. My brother put that out of his mind. A few weeks had passed since that event in the woods. He was at home when he got a message from his friend. In the message, my brother's friend told him how there was a man found in the woods they were exploring that night. And it also turned out the man had killed his family in one township and went to hide out in another township. My brother told me this story as a 15-year-old and when I was only 17. It still makes me think, even though it had been a year since he told me this, he has not brought it up to our parents. I was the only one he told. I still think about the story and it scares me. I always start to think, what would have happened if my brother and his friend kept following the footsteps? It sends a chill down my spine whenever I think of it. Highway encounter, serial killer. This is posted by Kid Charles Rock. My friend and I have a podcast where we tell scary stories. This is one that isn't famous in my family and that I grew up hearing and telling. Back in the 80s, my Aunt Kay was in her early 20s. This was before she married my uncle, and when she would drive long distances back and forth between her parents and my uncles to visit. It was a transitional period for them. He had just graduated and she hadn't moved out yet to be with him. It was a long drive across several states through the desert which took her hours. This desolate highway would have stretches of road that lasted hundreds of miles where you quite often wouldn't see another driver, let alone a gas station. So Aunt Kay set out and began one of these journeys. A couple hours into the drive, Aunt Kay noticed a dark vehicle slowly catching up to her. She barely noticed as she continued to sing along to Les Miserables until the vehicle got aggressively close. She turned off the music and looked into her rearview mirror, seeing the vehicle flash its brights and a hand pointing at her car and motioning to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed down and began to look for a good place to pull off the road to see what must be wrong with her car. The second she began to pull off the road, she said she felt and heard as clear as day, "Don't pull over." Then again stronger, "Don't pull over." Call it God, intuition, or just a gut feeling, but a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through Aunt Kay's body as she hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway. Heart pumping, Aunt Kay silently asking herself what the hell was that, as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, flashed their brights, and motioned to her to pull over. Fear and confusion set in Aunt Kay began to question what was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over? Was there something wrong with her car? And what the hell was that warning she felt? It would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, especially before cell phones. But she pressed on. Just as her resolve wavered, she started questioning if she truly did feel what she felt. She started slowly back down when the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered into the oncoming traffic lane and came level to my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned, and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. She said the second she looked into his eyes, she felt pure evil. She felt a horribly sick feeling in the pit of her stomach and again heard the words in her head, "Don't pull over." She described him as looking scary, greasy, and noticed he was missing a couple teeth in his smile that she'll never forget. That sent chills through her. This quickly dispelled any thoughts she had of pulling over, and she put the pedal to the metal to try to lose him. He chased after her. She slowed down. He slowed down. She sped up. He sped up. It got to the point that he began to try to push her car off the road. Aunt Kay was to the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize her alone, out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Aunt Kay sees a couple of semis off in the distance. She felt if only she could get close or even get in between those trucks, she would be safe, so she took off. He continued to flash his lights, honk his horn, and try to hit her car until she got close enough to the trucks. As she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicle slow way down and eventually disappear from view. She stayed with the trucks for a couple of hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and cry. Fast forward several years, my aunt and uncle are married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mom of several young children. Since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline 2020 and Unsolved Mysteries were always playing at their house. This day was no different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row. As she paired another match of socks, she heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. A car would go by with the family and he'd wait. Another car with the male driver would go by and he'd wait. But every so often a car would go by with the pretty woman driving alone. So I'd pull out behind and follow him. I'd flash my bright honks and motion for him to pull over. Aunt Kay, paralyzed, continued to listen. When they would eventually pull over, I'd tell them to pop the hood and I'd be able to tell them what was wrong with their car. They would, and I'd yank a couple wires. When the car wouldn't start, I'd tell him, no problem, my buddy has a shop in the next town. I can give you a ride and he'll give you a fair deal. My aunt slowly moved to the living room. They'd get in and I'd rape and kill them and bury him anywhere in the desert. When asked how many times he did this, he responded, they'll never find all the bodies. I can't even count. And how many got away? 2 or 3. My aunt stood alone staring into the same toothless grin she saw on the highway that day. It was Henry Lee Lucas. Thanks, Charlie. My aunt narrowly avoided being killed by a famous serial killer. Running in the Woods, posted by Ohio Girl 1234. This story happened in July. My husband and I decided to take our 2 kids camping one weekend since we can't do much else since the coronavirus. Plus, we love camping and I've never taken them before. Our daughter is 2 and our son is 6. We went to our usual place where the campsites are around half a mile each way from each other. Well, once it started to get dark, our kids started getting scared and wanted to leave, so we decided to take them to my dad's for the weekend, and we went back to the campsite. Well, around midnight, we decided it was time to go to bed. We laid down and fell asleep rather quickly, and around an hour or 2 later, I woke up and had to pee. I woke my husband up and he got up and walked with me to the bathroom, which was about a half hour away between campsites. On our way back, we saw a light coming from our campsite, which kind of worried us, making us think our family was looking for us. So we walked quickly back toward the campsite, but right before we got out of the trees, my husband threw his arms out to stop me. What? Shh. I stayed quiet and looked back at the campsite and watched the light, and that's when I saw the glint of silver in their hand. A long knife. We ducked down and hid behind some trees, and in typical scary movie fashion, the guy heard us moved and shined his light toward the woods. He started running towards the woods, and we took off running in the opposite direction. We could hear him running behind us, and we kept checking behind us, and the light was gone. We eventually were able to circle to the road and crept slowly back to my husband's SUV. We got back in and drove as fast as we could and called the police. They had us take them back to the campsite, and we waited in the car while they checked the campsite and the surrounding area. Soon, we saw more police cars pull up, and the 2 original officers came up and asked us to walk to the tent with them. We did, and what we saw was shocking. Our tent was slashed to pieces, and so was all of our stuff. The police ended up evacuating all the other campers and did a sweep of the entire area and didn't find anything except a flashlight that was along the way we ran. We follow up with police every month, and there have been no updates. I will post if anything new comes up. Always trust your gut, posted by Misguided Storm. Hi, so this is my first post in this sub. This happened recently and I still can't fully wrap my mind around it and just wanted to share. For context, I'm a college student and I live in city alone. I'm particularly close to the US-Mexico border, so human trafficking is unfortunately common here and something I'm very aware of. Last week I decided to make cinnamon rolls. I realized I didn't have any frosting, but it was still 7-something in the evening and kind of light outside, so I didn't feel nervous about running to the store to grab some. I was wearing a t-shirt, baggy sweats, and Crocs. This will be important for later. For anyone that doesn't know, there's essentially 2 ways to wear Crocs. 1, with the strap on top of your foot, which is more casual, or 2, with the strap behind your heel, which is more secure. I always wear them with the strap on top of my foot because they're just barely too tight the other way, which makes it uncomfortable. As I was walking down the stairs to the parking garage in my building, I had this thought in my head: you should flip the strap down on your shoes in case you need to run. I immediately thought that was weird because, like I said, I never wear them like that, and why the hell would I need to run? I argued with myself mentally for a minute, but as I got to my car, I decided to flip it anyway. In the store's parking garage, there are 3 ways to get into the store. 1, the sliding door with the ramp escalator, usually locked by 6 to 7. 2, an elevator. Or 3, exit the garage, walk around the block, and enter the front door. I usually go up the ramp, but since it was locked, I parked near the elevator. I also parked with a few of those big cement poles on my left, so no one could park on that side of me and pull me into a car or something. I walked over to the elevator, pushed the button, and all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The elevator is really slow, so I had a second to process this and try to figure out why I suddenly felt so panicked. As I was trying to convince myself that I was crazy and there's nothing wrong, I looked to my right and saw a car driving up kind of fast. There were dents and paint chips all over it, and the front right headlight was smashed. The panicked feeling was screaming at me at this point, and right before they stopped behind me, my gut told me I needed to run. I'm decently athletic, but I am not a runner. I don't know what gave me the power to run as fast as I did, but I ran all the way out of the garage and around the block to the front of the store. I could hear their tires screeching through the garage, but I didn't stop or turn around. I was shaking like a leaf by the time I got in, but I didn't want to go to my car because whoever that was could obviously just follow me home. I saw them fly past the front of the store and finally felt safe. I assumed they were gone. I walked a few laps through the aisles trying to collect myself, grabbed the frosting, and checked out. The entire time I was in the store, I kept trying to logically explain what had just happened. Maybe the guy on the passenger side was injured and that's why they were coming so close to the elevator? Maybe they needed to ask me a question? Maybe they think I'm absolutely psychotic for breaking into a sprint in the middle of the parking garage. But why did I hear tires screeching? I started walking towards the elevator to go back to the garage, telling myself I'm insane for being so scared. The panicked feeling came back in my stomach even stronger to the point that I felt nauseous. I worked up the courage to ask a security guard to walk me to my car. I'm a really shy person, so asking a stranger for help isn't something I'm likely to do. He agreed and was really nice and helpful. We went down the elevator together and made small talk. He could tell I was scared and told me if I ever needed anything, what days he's working, and who works the days he's not. As he stepped out of the elevator, the car from earlier was now parked diagonally in front of me, blocking me in. When they saw the security guard, they took off and I haven't seen that car since. I don't know why they're waiting for me, and part of me is still trying to come up with some sort of justification as to why they did that, but all I know is whatever told me to fix my shoe in case I needed to run was right, and I'm never going back to that store again.